The basic principle is that there's matter, you and me and everything around us, but there's also stuff called antimatter, which is essentially the exact same thing as matter. It's identical in every single way except for one tiny property called spin. I don't even know what the fuck it really is all about. But the only thing that's important for you to know is that I walked down the street and caught sight of Anti-Bob coming the other way of the copy of the Sun-Times in a rental Chicagoland in Northwest Indiana. Gamma rays are one of the results of matter-antimatter explosions. It wasn't that they hated each other, far from it. It was just that their states of matter didn't get along too well together. You see, Bob and Anti-Bob had the great misfortune of being completely identical. Not twins, mind you. They were not even related. Rather, it was something infinitely more sinister. An unthinkable anomaly of genetic randomization that resides in a degree of probability that gave no fewer than 7 mathematicians fatal cerebral hemorrhages. And really pissed off God. An individual who most definitely does not appreciate this sort of thing. The exact implications of this and the precise ramifications that occur next no doubt varies depending upon the theological bias of the observer, as so many things do. But the result was clear. Kind of. The subatomic compositions of Bob and Anti-Bob existed in a perverted matter-antimatter state that still baffles theoretical particle physicists. And that is a theoretical particle physicist. And since theoretical particle physicists baffle the vast majority of the populace, the world got confused. And then got shit-faced to counter the confusion. And probably ignore the whole ordeal. Bob and Anti-Bob, however, take their predicament very seriously, since it means that should they touch, their physical beings would totally annihilate each other with an energy output of roughly 1.5 times 10 to the 19 joules. Roughly equivalent to both the total energy production of the United States in 1 year, or, more pertinently, 3,400, oh shit, wait, and more pertinently, about 3,428 megatons of TNT. Making them very sad and very dead, and giving most everyone a very bad day. Logic would dictate that these two fellows would move to opposite ends of the globe to avoid potential catastrophe. But alas, this is America, after all, and logic carries about as much weight as a rat's left testicle on the moon of Pluto. Which doesn't carry much weight itself anymore, it's not a planet anymore. And since they're identical in every other respect, they have similar tastes, including an affinity for Chicago and investment banking. They decided, over the phone of course, to try and coexist in the same city without brushing shoulders. In the city of big shoulders, ironically. It's been some late mid to 30 years, and there have been no smoldering craters to indicate that there have been any incidents. Today, they passed each other successfully, and the people gave a sigh of relief. Or at least they would, if any of them would have bothered to pay attention. Bob merrily proceeded to his office to do whatever the hell investment bankers do, and Anti-Bob went to do, in a very similar fashion, whatever the hell investment bankers do in a slightly different office building 3 blocks north. Now, it was just about 12:37 when the Red Bull wore off, and left Anti-Bob in a deep funk. Not the George Clinton kind of funk. That puts one in a wonderful grooving motion, mind you. Rather, it was the funk that is distinctly unfunky. Anti-funky, if you really must insist. Like most typical midday depressions, it was based upon subatomic symmetry and the fundamental laws of physics. Well, that's actually only typical for a very small and uniquely deranged segment of the human population. Anyway, Anti-Bob was intensely miserable. and quite fed up with his lot in life, he realized some time ago he was the existential whipping boy for a universe seemingly bent against him. He was not just a freak. He was a freak with no identity other than his destructive nature relative to some schmuck named Bob. A sickening twist of subatomic symmetry that made a special case for him, just so he could stew in misery and be haunted by the possibility of obliterating a good-sized chunk of the continent. What occurred next may seem predictable, and perhaps excessively cliche, and more than likely is. But Bob thought was a fabulous idea. The following illustrates to you young folk exactly why energy drinks, investment banking, and supersymmetrical particle physics do not mix. Bob positioned himself on the edge of his newly opened window with as much balance as he could muster. There was no ledge for him to stand on, so this would have to do. A sidewalk, some 30-odd stories below. The sidewalk, some 30-odd stories below, seemed to recoil slightly from Bob, as it was a great deal more intelligent than people will admit. Bob mentally shook his fist at the universe. And with a tragic satisfaction, he pushed himself off. But fate! But fate, it seems, not only has a sense of irony, it has an exceedingly morbid sense of humor that makes an overwhelming majority of bipedal mammals very angry at it. For at that very moment, Bob thought of something that instantly lightened his spirits. What made him the Bob and not the other guy? Nothing! It was arbitrary. He was just as much Bob as he was Bob, just from a different point of view. For all anyone knew, he was Bob, and Bob was the Bob. Unfortunately, this life-altering turn of events came too late to prevent another life-altering turn of events brought to us by our good friend, universal gravitation. Bob accelerated downward at somewhere around 9 meters per second, shouting pained profanities at a rate considerably higher than his terminal velocity. That's not a pun, you sick person. But as it happened, fate didn't anticipate just how ironic its own irony was. And something quite unexpected happened. The implications of this previous statement are quite staggering. So much so, in fact, that the space-time continuum personally wet itself in a most embarrassing fashion that inadvertently teleported roughly 700 clones of Henry Kissinger into the bathtub of an extremely fortunate woman living in Branson, Missouri. Bob was late for his business lunch at the subway on Washington between Wells and LaSalle, and took a shortcut past the offices of convenient investment banking firms. An extremely quick-thinking young man, loitering nearby, recognized the running Bob and the falling Bob and performed the world's fastest calculation of projectile motion scenario. He announced the summation of this computation by screaming an expletive, whose identity is now confidential, calling for horses. Bob heard this and glanced up with enough time to contort his face into a strangely hilarious look of utter surprise. The rest was silence. Well, not really. The end!